Ready, and Matthias is already ready for quite some time. Matthias Eke, please start our event. Thank you. Just very quick note, this is a joint event of SND Group, FEPS and Kalevi Sosa Foundation, and we're very grateful for SND Group for this opportunity to host this event here. The event is dedicated to the tax justice. One part will be more focused on the presentation of the FEPS study, FEPS and Kalevi sources study, and the second part will be broader discussion. At this point, I leave the floor to you, Matthias.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, dear colleagues, researchers and guests, well, thank you for being at this event. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to today's event on capital and wealth taxation, on tax justice, albeit remotely. I'm currently in Germany, where our party is in the final stages of our crucial national election campaign. So thank you for making it possible that we can exchange at least remotely. Well, I would very much thank S&D and Kalevi Sosa Foundation and FEPS for making this happen, because it is such a vital topic, one that affects the future of Europe and also of Germany, the country I'm campaigning in the moment. What can we do about rising inequality, which threatens both our economic stability and social cohesion by the means of taxation? We are at the crossroads. Inequality in Europe and globally has reached alarming levels. I think the data speaks for itself. According to Oxfam's latest report, billionaire wealth increased in 2024 3 times faster than the year before. This means that last year, 204 new billionaires were created, nearly 4 per week. Well, this disparity widened significantly during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, in 2023, more billionaires were created through inheritance than entrepreneurship for the first time. I think this is a stunning fact about how dysfunctional our system has become. At the same time, 21% of EU's population are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Real wage growth in many EU countries has been stagnating, especially in the lower income levels. And we lack enough funding, enough resources for investment, for proper public services. So we definitely need tax revenues, which unfortunately do not come enough out of wealth and capital taxation. While this situation is not inevitable, it is the result of policy choices, of course, and it can be corrected through decisive political action. Taxation, especially capital and wealth taxes, offers one of the most effective ways to reduce inequality and fund the public good that underpins our prosperous societies. However, we must also be strategic in how we structure these taxes. Wealth taxes alone cannot drive economic progress, of course. We need a forward-looking approach that incentivizes investment in productive sectors. Let's take, for example, renewable energy. By redirecting capital towards sustainable industries, we can not only create high-quality jobs, but also advance our climate goals under the European Green Deal. The same applies to investment in digital infrastructure, which can bridge the technological gap across member states and strengthens EU's competitiveness. We need to critically assess the nature of investment, as not all investments serve public interests. An active state leverages tax policy to guide investments towards productive sectors that drive innovation and create jobs. Conversely, poorly designed tax systems can fuel speculation in non-productive assets, a trend which is evident in many European housing markets today. We need a tax system that protects workers and targets unearned wealth. Oxfam calculates that 60% of billionaire wealth is either from crony or monopolistic sources or inherited. A global wealth tax could raise billions of euros to invest in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Despite this, many member states have abolished or weakened wealth taxes over the years, often under pressure from powerful lobbies and fears of capital flight. Spain is the only country in the EU that still levies a general net wealth tax. By coordinating wealth tax policies across the EU and eliminating tax havens within our borders, we can ensure that the wealthiest individuals contribute fairly to the prosperity of all citizens. Ahead of the new mandate in the European Parliament, we as S&D have been calling for an EU initiative to support wealth taxes in member states, helping finance social and climate-friendly projects and strengthening the EU. We all welcome the Brazilian G20 presidency's initiative to prioritize global wealth taxation. Wealth concentration is a global challenge, of course, that no country can solve alone, requiring coordinated action at both EU and international levels. While many details of the Brazilian proposal remain uncertain and securing tax justice may be difficult against the new US administration, the fact that this discussion has begun at the G20 level is already a reason for hope. Today, labor income remains the primary contributor to public finance in the EU, accounting for around 50% of tax revenue, while taxes on capital generate around 22%. This disproportionate reliance on taxing workers highlights the imbalance in the current tax system. So capital gains taxation plays a crucial role in ensuring a fairer and more balanced tax system. While measures to combat profit shifting and tax evasion in corporate taxation have progressed, the avoidance of taxes on capital income remains largely unregulated. Capital income is an important source of revenue for states and an instrument for ensuring a certain degree of equality, of course. A lack of harmonization between member states leads to tax avoidance. Wealthy individuals can significantly reduce their tax burden through legal loopholes. In almost all countries, unrealized gains are exempt from taxation. This allows wealthy individuals to defer capital gains to avoid paying taxes on them altogether. So the debate around taxation has often been framed as a choice between fairness and economic growth, but this has always been a dubious claim, to be honest, as countries with well-structured tax systems, like the Nordics, for example, outperform others in terms of both economic growth and social indicators. Meanwhile, the recent rise in extreme inequality has shattered this myth. So our tax system's failure to channel extreme wealth towards the common good is actively harming economic stability and social cohesion. Never before in the history of our democracies have individuals without democratic accountability, like Musk or Bezos, been able to wield such immense power through concentrated wealth, often at the direct expense of the broader public interest. This growing imbalance poses a serious threat to both our economies and the foundation of our democratic governments. So this event is a great opportunity to discuss how we, as policymakers and experts, can shape a more balanced approach. I look forward to hearing today's insights of presenters, including Laurie Finer and Nico Panka, whose research offers valuable recommendations on reforming capital income taxation in the EU and preventing harmful tax competition through harmonization and transparency reforms. Let me conclude by emphasizing that this is more than a technical discussion. It is a question of political will and of moral responsibility even. Progressive taxation is about upholding the principle that everyone contributes their fair share to the common good. It is about ensuring that no one is left behind in our pursuit for prosperity. Thank you for your attention. I'm very excited to start today's interesting discussions, and I'm looking forward to your active engagement and all the contributions that will be listened to today.
Thank you.
I think my mic is now on. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive and also motivating introduction. From this point onwards, I give now the managing somehow responsibility to Elodie Lema, who is our moderator for today. She is a journalist in tax notes, so basically very knowledgeable on the topic. So now it's up to you, Elodie.
Thank you, Anna. As a journalist, I don't find myself in this chair very often, but I must say that it's empowering. I think we all know in this room that taxation is a really sensitive topic, and yet I don't think I've seen so much debate in recent tax history as the one that we have right now on wealth taxation. There's even this patriotic millionaires movement that is actually asking to be taxed more. It's a really informed debate as well. There's a lot of data also on inequality that we'll have to discuss also today. And then a lot of proposals, a lot of campaigns about this. And so I'm really happy that we have a great panel today to discuss. We will first start with the study made by Lauri Finner, who's director of the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, and Nico Panka, who's head of public affairs and tax specialist at the Central Organization of Finnish Trade Union. And then we will hear from our two panelists who will comment. We have with us Chiara Putaturo, who's tax and inequality policy advisor and deputy head of the EU office of Oxfam. And we have, of course, Jonas Fernandez, who's an MEP and SND Econ coordinator. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Lauri Finner to present the study.
Thank you, Elodie, and thank you for SND Group and FEPS for giving me the opportunity to speak here. So I'm the director of Helsinki-based research think tank Kalevi Sorsa Foundation. We're focused on just transition, but also just taxation. And personally, I've been working with taxes all my career as a civil servant, as a researcher, as a tax policy advisor. And we've been doing the study with Nico Panka, who is also a tax specialist and working with taxes all his career. So now we have the slides already. So in the study, maybe you can put the next slide, please. There's the cover page. We have the reports available over there, and it's also available on FEPS and our website today. So we're discussing the state of capital income taxation in Europe and how we should tackle the current problems that there are. So first of all, what the report discusses, there are basically three topics. So first of all, we present the state of current capital income taxes and what are the problems there. Then we have this sort of empirical data on tax systems of 15 different European countries tax systems, and then we have policy recommendations that are very important part of our study. Matthias Ecke mentioned already a little about the development of taxation. This graph presents the development of capital taxes and taxes on labor from 1965 until 2020, and we can see that in proportion to capital income, the total taxes on capital have decreased by roughly 5 percentage points in this period. And in the meantime, the taxes on labor in proportion to income have increased by roughly 10 percentage points. So we're taxing more and more labor and less capital. That's the long development. If we look at the current situation, this is a picture from tax evasion report of EU Tax Observatory. Quentin Parinello will talk about from EU Tax Observatory in the next session. But the current situation, if we look at distribution of taxes between different income groups, the situation is that taxation is not progressive, and it's not progressive specifically not for the top 1% in the income. Top 1% income group and not specifically for the billionaires. This picture is from 3 countries, France, the Netherlands, and the United States. But if we look at the next slide, we can see that the situation is basically the same everywhere. So these pictures are from Finland and Spain, where taxation is not progressive either for the rich. And the ultimate reason is that the capital and thus its returns are concentrated to the top 1%, and it's taxed proportionally at lower rates than labor income. So you can say that middle class workers pay proportionally higher taxes than the ultra rich and top 1%. Next one, please. What are the consequences? Obviously, the wealth has concentrated. This graph shows the development for the past 25 years from 1995 to 21, and we can see that wealth is concentrating on a global level to the ultra-rich. And if we would look at the development in the Western countries, we could see the similar development also within countries. So basically, wealth is concentrating within country as well as globally to the ultra-rich. To put kind of findings of our case studies in very short, and you can say that the fundamental reason for capital income tax base erosion is that tax laws are national while capital is mobile and flows across borders to where the tax is lower. So this is kind of the fundamental logic why this problem occurs. But to go a bit more into detail with the report, first of all, why capital income taxation is important and what capital income taxation is in the first place. Capital income tax is the tax levied on individuals, so their net capital income, so you can deduct the costs in relation to these incomes or returns. And we talk about taxing dividends, capital gains, interest payments, and so on. They are a very essential part of modern tax system, even though they don't create that big share of the tax income or tax levies right now. They are an important part of the tax system because we cannot tax the profits of corporations without taxing both the corporation and the capital income when the dividends are paid out of the profits. And also, if we don't tax capital income sufficiently, it is possible to shift labor earned income as capital income. So we have to look at the whole system, and all parts are important, and also capital income. So if there was no capital income taxation, it was not possible to make taxation progressive. And the problems we now see show kind of the problem. Since capital income taxation is so low, the taxation isn't progressive now. There are basically four problems of capital income taxation we find in the report. All of them are kind of related to the fact that taxation is low in a country, and because of that, people also in other countries can avoid taxes by shifting their income to another income type and to another country. So if there's a low tax in one country, it always facilitates tax avoidance elsewhere. And we find that increasing number of countries have recently tailored this capital income tax breaks specifically for the rich. We find this kind of development in Italy, in Malta, in Spain, but obviously everyone knows that, for example, Switzerland has had such regimes for a long time as well. We also find that several countries, such as Belgium and Switzerland, have zero tax rates for some capital income types. Elodie Lamer just mentioned that Belgium is now discussing that they could introduce capital gains tax. So obviously these things change all the time. Our data is from 2020, 23, and 24. So obviously there might be some changes afterwards as well. But more and more countries are introducing these tax incentives, tax breaks for the rich, and other countries obviously are vulnerable for such for tax avoidance, since these loopholes kind of facilitate it. Next slide, please. The next one, please. Okay, so the main problem we find is that taxation is, since it's not harmonized in the EU, there are low taxes in some countries, and it facilitates tax avoidance. We also know that similar problems have been addressed in corporate income taxation. So since last year in the EU, we have this minimum 15% corporate income tax for the multinationals. And our kind of hypothesis or finding is that this harmful tax competition is shifting more and more to capital income taxation of individuals since it's coming proportionally at least more profitable for individuals and also for tax consultancy companies and tax advisors to sell these tax avoidance structures. So our kind of main proposal is that the EU should adopt a directive establishing a minimum capital income tax rate. So if the problem is low taxation, then the solution would be providing at least some sort of minimum rate for this. Obviously, it's important to share or to distribute the tax base fairly, justly between countries. In corporate income tax, we have tax avoidance directive that, for example, has exit tax rules that are helpful in distributing the tax base fairly between countries. We would obviously need something like that also in capital income taxation, so that all income would be taxed at least once. One problem we point out that is also discussed in the EU Tax Observatory's proposal that will be discussed later this year is that unrealized capital gains are often not taxed ever, and you can address it with net wealth taxes since they are based on net wealth and they don't taxing. It's not possible to avoid taxes with these, but if we look at the kind of the wider tax system and we want all income to be taxed at least once, we have to also tax unrealized capital gains at least in some point. So it's a bit different solution. Our fourth proposal that we find is kind of complementing and not competing against the minimum capital income tax rate is the net wealth tax to the ultra rich that will be discussed in the later session, and maybe fifth proposal is more of a soft law proposal, is that the EU Code of Conduct on business taxation should be extended to include capital income taxation, as we see that it also tax avoidance related and tax competition related to capital income taxation also harms the internal market, so it should be discussed there as well. Do I have any more time left?
Really quickly.
Okay, so maybe the next one. I will just very briefly tell that we have discussed in the report, obviously, all these policy proposals in more detail, and they are technical issues, but for example, the capital income tax, minimum capital income tax, more or less you could implement it based on the ideas of minimum corporate income tax. There has to be, for example, some thresholds that low capital incomes are not addressed in it, and there would be several details, but I think it's out of the scope of at least my presentation to discuss them in more detail. But I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. I seem to recall actually a debate on the extension of the mandate of the Code of Conduct Group to individual taxation, but it was refused by member states. I think it was in 2022, but maybe the debate will evolve now. I will now give the floor, I think, first to Chiara for comments. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to the authors of the study. I think that the report comes really at the right moment, and it gives the answer to two main challenges that we have today. One is that one of inequality, the other that one of the need of resources. On inequality, some weeks ago, Oxfam published its flagship inequality report. Some figures have been already mentioned. I want to mention some EU figures. We showed that the EU billionaires' wealth has increased by almost 400 million per day in 2024, with a new millionaire almost every week. So 2024 was really a very successful year for the billionaires. And second, on the need of resources, the EU institution has started just now to discuss the EU budget, and we hear that there are not enough resources. And what is put at risk is the climate agenda, is social policies, is the development and humanitarian assistance. But this report really gives an answer, one of the solution, that is taxation, specifically taxation of capital income, but also wealth, that we know are in the hands of the wealthy individuals. And I think the report makes really strong arguments using evidence that support why the EU should intervene on this topic. And I will mention like three that I consider particularly relevant. So first, we have seen progresses on measures to tackle corporate tax avoidance, but we haven't seen anything to tackle tax avoidance of individuals. And for this reason, as the author said, there is a risk that harmful tax competition can shift to individual capital income. Second, the report tries to debunk the myth that capital income is harmful for growth and for the economy. And I would like to mention to strengthen, this theory, mentioning the report that the OECD published in 2023 on capital taxation, where they also say that there is no academic consensus that capital taxation is harmful for the economy. And we always mention a study of France that it shows that when the tax on dividends was increased by 3, actually the corporate investment increased. And then third point, I think it's very useful to have this overview of the different systems in the EU countries that show not only how there is a risk of tax avoidance within a country, but also there is this risk of harmful tax competition among the member states. Also, like systems that are maybe more progressive on capital taxation, like Denmark, Germany, or Norway, they are put in danger because of the harmful tax competition of other countries. I would have had also some estimation of what we are losing because of that. And I mentioned here the figure of the EU Tax Observatory that will intervene after, that estimated that 7.5 billion euros per year are lost because of harmful tax regimes of individuals in Europe. And let me pass to the recommendation. I will mention 3 that for me are really very, very important. So one, the minimum capital income tax rate. And I think it's very useful also the parallel that you do with the VAT. A system like this already exists, and we could translate it into capital income tax rate. Then the code of conduct group. It's true that it is a bit of a soft intervention, but we have already a group that is looking at harmful tax regimes of companies. Why shouldn't this group also look at individual harmful tax regimes? And then it is important, the point that you make in the recommendation, to also complete the capital income with wealth tax. We know that wealth inequality is much higher than capital income inequality. So if we really want to reduce inequality, we need to address also wealth, and among wealth there is also inheritance. As Oxfam, we estimated that in the EU 69% of wealth is inherited, and a tax on inheritance will help to address that. And then let me finish just making the bridge with the national and the global context. Maybe I would have added some recommendation also to the countries, like for instance to hire also on their own the tax rate on capital gain, on dividends, and for us they should be at least aligned to the taxes on labor. and then also to introduce progressive tax rates for different brackets. And then it's good that you conclude the report with a link to the global reforms. So we think that the EU is not alone, and there are currently possibility to discuss the taxation of high net worth individual at global level. The G20 did a statement of that, and the UN, just in this moment, they are negotiating a convention that could include taxation of high net worth individuals. So really, the EU should support it and not abstain. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, a member of European Parliament.
Okay, hello, thank you. Good afternoon. First, I would like to congratulate FEPS, Kalevi Sorsa Foundation for this report and the authors. And thank you so much for inviting me to present the report and maybe to give a more political speech about what we should do on taxation. I remember when I was a student, I studied economics in Spain in the late 90s and the first years of the current century. And I think that in the academia, then there were at least two paradigms which came us until the situation where we are. One of them was that progressive tax systems reduce incentives to work and to invest. So we needed to reduce labor taxes, of course, capital taxes. We needed to compete among member states to attract more investments. We should reduce, as I say, labor tax because they could reduce the incentives to work. And we needed to have maybe a more neutral tax system at national level because the relevant element or the relevant tool to reduce inequality was then public expenditure. So at least what I studied in university was we needed to reduce the progressive aspect of our tax systems, to have neutral system, to reduce disincentives and trying to focus our public policy to reduce inequalities through public expenditure. The second paradigm, which created with the first one, the mess where we have been living within the last decade, was that if we really wanted to have optimal public expenditure policies, we needed again to analyze moral hazard of our programs. So unemployment systems could create disincentives to work, minimum incomes, even health public system or public pension system, all of the public policies that we had in mind to reduce inequality through public expenditures. At the end of the day, if we wanted to attend incentives and reduce the problem that we face around moral hazard of the people, we needed to focus our policies. We needed to analyze properly the people who receive our policies. We needed to introduce incentives to come back to work. We needed to reduce, at the end of the day, the universal framework that these programs had when we put them in place decades before. The result of these two paradigms that, as I told you, at least in the academia, were very, very dominant then, we can see the result nowadays. Inequalities increase in all European countries, also poverty in most of the European countries, and indeed we have not only a social problem, we also face a political problem because part of the result of these policies, I think that we can see them when voters in many member states decide to support nationalism, anti-democratic or even fascist parties. The solidarity or the feeling that we are in a community failed as a result, apart from other issues of this kind of policies, at least from the 90s until now. So I think that tax policies have to be again in the front run of our political program. For a while, we even said in many member states that we didn't want to increase taxation. From an electoral point of view, we thought that we lost the debate, and indeed, I think that we didn't want to have a proper debate in the political arena about the relevant paper that taxations play in our society. And I think that we are, or we should be, at the end of this trend. Thanks to this report, we can compare capital income taxation among member states in Europe and not only the European Union. Maybe from a more pragmatic point of view, and in my case as a member of the Committee on Economic Affairs, we have been talking for a while on capital market union. Yeah? And honestly, I don't know how we could fulfill a truly capital market union without any kind of harmonization on capital income taxes. Yeah, so even from a practical point of view, and even in the debate that we have nowadays in this House and in the Commission, the different consultation process about how we should do to advance on capital market union, the taxation debate is outside. It's completely outside. Nobody is talking that we need to harmonize capital income tax if we really want to have a truly capital market union. There are other hidden elements in the debate, but for sure this is one of them. I have to recognize also what we did during the last few years, yeah, because the OECD agreements, the directive to implement a minimum tax rate, at least on businesses, I honestly think that at least on business taxations, we were able to advance in a more progressive agenda. It's true that now, with the new Trump administration, I should not trust so much on international agreements, not only on this matter, but also in others. Yeah? So we don't have yet a first pillar on the OECD negotiation, and I think that we should not have it. Yeah? So international cooperation is always needed, but I think that we need to start to think on European answer. So even though we were able to advance so much on corporate taxation, we need, as the report said, to advance also in harmonization in capital income tax if we really want to have a capital market union, apart from the rest of the reasons. And two last comments. Wealth tax. If we really have a fair tax system and a fair income capital tax framework, in a perfect world, we should not have this or need this kind of taxation. Yeah, because if we are able to tax properly the dividends, at the end of the day, the wealth itself is the result of the work of the investments. The work paid taxes, investment also paid taxes. So in theory, we should not have it. But after seeing the result or the evolution of the wealth in Europe and around the world, we need to defend properly this kind of taxation. Yeah, we need a wealth tax for sure, and we need also another tax that sometimes is, or at least from my perspective, is not so present in the public debate that it should be. As my colleagues from Oxfam said, inheritance tax is something that we need to harmonize at European level, because at the end of the day is the fire tax in our tax system. Yeah, if you work, you have to pay taxes. If you invest, you have to pay taxes. But honestly, I don't know why the debate around the inheritance taxes is not more present in public debate, because honestly, I think that this is the fire tax that we should have. So finally, I would like again to congratulate the authors and FEPS Kalevi-Sorsa Foundation for this paper. I think that we need a lot to do. I I also think that we should not rely more on international agreements. With the new U.S. administration, I think that we are not alone, but we cannot trust on this kind of conversation. And we need to give a political fight, a political battle. We cannot avoid the debate on taxation in our electoral campaigns, in our governments, in our parties, in our member states. We need to defend, again, a progressive tax system, no more neutral tax system, no more concerns around incentives or moral hazard or wherever. That is, at the end of the day, political measures that I think that our party solved in the past, and we need to come back to our historical and roots promise, defending equality and fighting against inequality and poverty. A capital income tax is needed, at least from a practical point of view, if we really want to have a capital market union, but not only. And wealth and inheritance taxes need to be also in the front run of our promises. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I see that we are a bit behind schedule, and I want to, at some point, give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions. So if you have one, start thinking about it now. But first, I would like, because we haven't heard from Nico yet, so I would like you to give you the chance to address maybe some remarks that were said. And maybe if I can ask, the proposal that you have in your study are quite bold. It's about EU directive, and we all know that we have little competence in the EU, and also that we have this freedom of movement of capital. So I'm wondering how you could address all of this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So maybe a little bit about the framework and the current economic situation in the European Union. I think like the starting point from this entire discussion right now is that there is a dire investment need in the European Union, which is seen if we compare to China or the States, or if we look at the Draghi report, which came out last year. And I think like the investment gap in the Union is so large that there is actually no other way to address this other than taxation. And the solution is not to abolish our own taxation framework. I'm also a doctoral researcher on tax law and EU law, and I've been focusing a lot about the treaties and what the treaties say about the taxation and what kind of competence the treaties give the European Union. And it is true that mainly there are two areas which there is competence. That's the protection of the internal market one, and the other one is environmental regulation side and the negative effects that the environmental side is offering. But if we look at the European Union history and how taxation has been worked on previously, we have done a lot of legislation, even with under the current treaties, that address these issues, like Pillar 2, Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, which we talked about. And we can also have a quite actual legal debate about what is actually protecting the internal market and which is not, because you can make the case that Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive is actually also protecting the internal market. So that also gives competence to do something else. And when we talk about the differences between the direct taxation and what the treaties tell us, I think that you should also remember that the Union has competence under their own resources system, so we can do indirectly a lot in the field of taxation. We can introduce measures that do not violate the competencies of the member states. I think one great example is the so-called plastic tax, or the plastic own resource, which was introduced a few years ago. And it basically tells the member states that they have the possibility to introduce a plastic tax if they want to, but they don't have to. But you can also have the debate that is it a de facto tax? But the member states still can choose, even though it doesn't require them to have a taxation. And so I don't think there is a good legal or political argument to avoid this discussion, because there is a lot that the Union can do if they want to, if we have a broad enough political coalition to do this. And then the question is, and I come back to this investment need point, that if we want to address this investment gap, and if we want to add more equality in the union, then we should talk about taxation. I think like for many parties, especially on the left side, that is a very important point that was said before, that we should not avoid this discussion, because the economic policy discussion, the tax policy discussion is something that also the parties on the left can take charge of and have that discussion. It is not something that we should give away, and it is not something that we should collectively avoid, because we have great and possible solutions even within the framework of the current treaties. Thank you.
Laurie, do you want to add something?
Maybe not to exactly the same question, but I want to come in with a couple of points. First of all, I think it's important what you brought up, and that it's not about just the capital income taxation. It's about different forms of taxing capital, and they kind of complement each other. So we also need to talk about taxes for ultra rich based on net wealth. We need to talk about inheritance taxes. So they are kind of complementing, and they are not against each other, because they have a bit different need behind, bit different goal for different kinds of taxes. So we kind of need all of them. But I wanted to also point out this, that Matthias Ecke, in his speech, he talked about that it's about political will, and I think also EU Tax Observatory often stressed that we can end these problems if we want. It's a matter of political will, and taxation is an area where we have had quite positive development in the last, say, 15 years after financial crisis. So and I think the ultimate reason actually is behind it is that we know a lot more since we have kind of had this empirical revolution in economics before Piketty, and also before maybe Acemoglu. We didn't know that much about what impact, for example, taxation has on growth, and how unequally the wealth and incomes are distributed, and it has had a huge effect, for example, in the OECD work, and obviously 15 years ago, I don't think anyone would have even imagined of a minimum corporate income tax, and now we already have it. So I think it's possible to make these changes, and I think also this kind of positive remark that more information and more research has an impact.
Thank you. I'm going to scan the room to see if there is any question from the audience. I don't see any. Okay, then I will ask a last question to the two speakers. There's a big debate in the EU right now about competitiveness and how we should declutter the tax system, because we have this pillar 2 and it's enough to do anti-abuse and anti-tax avoidance. And I'm wondering how any kind of new tax on wealth could fit in this debate, which seems to be going the other way around. Maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. No, maybe the debate on competitiveness and how the right groups of this parliament are putting this debate on the table, at least from my opinion, is completely a mistake. Yeah, we need to increase our competitiveness. That at the end of the day, or at least what I understand by competitiveness, is productivity. And we need to do a lot to increase the consolidation of the single market. Yeah. I was reading just before of this seminar this morning a report of the IMF that we knew in October, if I don't remember, but around with the regional economic outlook, and the current shadow tariffs inside of the single market is around 40% for products, for goods, and 110% for services. Yeah. So in the current single market, the Europeans pay shadow tariffs between 45 100% if we apply these no tariff restrictions as at Valorant tax. Yeah. So if the right groups wants really to reduce administrative burden, yeah, I think that we have a work to do. Yeah, and the work that we have to do is not related with taxonomy or CSRD or CSDDD. These directives are not the real administrative burden that we need to remove. The real administrative burden that we need to remove are the national barriers that are nowadays in the single market. And in the case of the capital market, as I said before, the harmonization of capital income tax is needed. It's part of the project if we truly believe that we need to consolidate capital markets. So I think that there is a roadmap to increase competitiveness or productivity in Europe. None of them passed to reduce European regulation. This is not what we should do. We need to remove, as I said, national barriers to let single market work as it must do it. And taxation, apart from capital income, that I said is part of the, or should be part of the reduction of the administrative burden. The other taxes that we needed is related with the public investment that we need to do. Yeah. So if we do believe that we need to increase competitiveness, as at least from my perspective, is more single market and more public investment. And for doing both, we need this kind of taxation, and we need it at a European level, because the current distribution of wealth, as honestly, I think that this is not just an economic or political or social problem. It's a threat on democracy, on our democracy, the current distribution of wealth. So I think that we need to be more aggressive, more brave. We need to defend higher taxes. We need to defend a clear increment of wealth tax, inheritance tax, capital tax, and we have to defend it to the public. And this is the only way, at least from my perspective, to increase competitiveness. That is not the same what the right groups thinks.
Thank you. And the last words to Chiara.
No. Yes. First of all, let me say that I think harmonization is also simplification. So for this reason, actually, companies, but also investors should be in favor of an harmonization, because it will make also their life easier. Then, as I said before, both inequality and harmful tax competition are bad for the growth, are bad for the economy. It is the IMF that is saying that inequality actually impacts negatively growth. And then another point, I've said how many wealth is coming from inheritance. In 2023, there was more wealth coming from inheritance than from entrepreneurship. So it's really, gaining at the lottery. It's not coming from competitive advantage. And if we don't tax it, it will just be parked there and not used for real investment. So there is really a strong argument to link also fairer taxation to competitiveness.
Thank you very much. I thank you very much to all panelists for this interesting debate. I think we will quickly change and invite other panelists on stage for the second panel, and then we'll get started.
Everyone, please come to your seats. We're about to start. Attention, attention, please sit down.
Hello, can I ask everybody to take their seat, please? Hello. We are about to start. It would be good if Sophie... So please, everybody, take your seat. We will start the second question. So the second question will look more at the opportunity to tax the super rich at EU level or global level. We hear a lot that capital is actually mobile, and so if you tax it at national level, then it will just leave the country. There was an initiative by the Brazilian presidency to actually initiate the debate at the G20 level. Of course, with the US pulling out yesterday of the UN tax talks, and before that from the OECD Global Tax Plan, we're not quite sure how this discussion will go, but that's what we will address during this debate. And one thing that I find interesting as well is that yesterday the Belgian government reached a deal on a coalition agreement, and this coalition agreement actually removes a historical opposition in Belgium and introduce a capital gains taxation. So it shows that sometimes you can build majority cross-party and then do something at national level. So we will discuss all of this. And to discuss all of this, I have with me Aurore Laluc, who is a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Econ Committee. I have Esther Lynch, who is General Secretary of the ETUC, European Trade Union Confederation. And then we have Quentin Parinello, who is Policy Director at the EU Tax Observatory. I will give the floor first to MEP Aurore Laluc.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to have some time to discuss taxation. As you know, is something that it is quite close to my red heart. I think we are in a tricky situation because 5 years ago, at the beginning of my mandate, talking about wealth tax, talking about capital tax was, I would say, almost impossible. And even in the public debate, I mean, it was like cursing, insulting people. It was impossible to talk about the wealth tax. Now we are in a situation where we have some room to discuss the idea of wealth taxation and capital taxation. So this is a very good news. But the bad news is that we are not in the same geopolitical situation, I would say. The context has changed a lot, and there is perhaps a war on the tariff, but there will be also perhaps also a tax war. And we are here discussing wealth tax and capital tax, but you know, and you mentioned it, that the US withdraw from the OECD deal on the minimum effective taxation on big corporation. So, I mean, it's not easy. On one hand, we can talk about taxation. On the other end, the political context is not so great. And on the other end, we need some fresh money. And we need some money because I suppose that you all read the Draghi report. And if you read the Draghi report, then you know that we need to invest in Europe. You know that, of course, we can maybe at some point manage to achieve the capital market union, but first, it's not an easy journey. There is some steps to follow that are not easy. You need to have a single supervisor, you will need to have some harmonization, and you need, by the way, also a common ground for taxation. BFID would have been useful for instance. And even if we manage at some point to create this capital market union, it won't be able to fix all the situation. It won't be able to fund everything that we need. We will need at some point some public money, and this is where we have a case for taxation. So, of course, from a technical point of view, there is so many things we can tax. We can tax capital gains, we can talk about wealth tax, but I think that maybe there is also the financial sector that can be taxed, but maybe we could also recall the taxation on share buyback. I don't know if you remember that in the Inflation Reduction Act, Joe Biden suggested and even implemented such a taxation. And at the European level, we are like, okay, we don't need this kind of taxation because we don't have this kind of situation. And frankly, at that time, I agreed with that. But when you look at the situation now in Europe, I think there is a case for this kind of taxation. And I will just give you an example coming from my country. Last December, AXA, is the big insurance company, sold its asset management business to BNP Paribas for 5.4 billion. Of which 3.8 billion were used for a share buyback, rather than being invested in the real economy. So I think typically in this kind of case, there is something we could do. We need also to be very vocal still on taxation, even it's going to be difficult because of the world context, but also because I would say of the majority in the European Parliament, but also in the Commission, because we must not forget that taxation is an economic issue, is a social issue, but it is also a democratic issue. I mean, taxation is the fact that you recognize the political entity you are living in. That's the first point. And the second point is when there are some very, very wealthy people, and look at what is going on in the US, then they have a fantastic power. And it's very hard to stop them when they want something. So I think that we also always should have in mind that having some unfair taxation is unfair, so it is a democratic issue, but it could also create an oligarchy. To put it simply. So we need to, it's going to be tough. I think we should keep on fighting more than ever because we need some money, because we need some fairness, but we need also to protect our democracy.
Thank you. I just want to say that we're also supposed to have Paul Magnette present here today, but he could not, and he apologized. He had urgent negotiation in Belgium, so he canceled his participation. But I will now turn to Esther Lynch. I want to ask you about labor taxes, because every year the European Commission publishes its economic recommendation, and every year it's the same thing. It says that labor taxes are too high, that countries' budget actually rely too much on labor taxation, and with the aging population, it's going to be an issue at some point. At some point, I think also the Commission mentioned a debate on the tax mix 2050, but then it kind of disappeared from the radar. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think the Commission failed to move with this tax rebalancing until now? And what can people that are present here actually do to make this happen?
Thank you. I'm going to answer with a word of thanks, a word of encouragement, and a word of warning. So my first is a word of thanks, and it's to the authors of this excellent report, because I actually understood most of it. So I really want to thank you for that. And I'm only half joking saying you should send this to President Trump, because this graph blows out of the water his suggestion that millionaires pay too much tax. Out of the water. In fact, what that graph shows to me is the screaming injustice where the lowest paid pay a higher percentage than the richest. And that's a screaming injustice. My word then of encouragement is to everybody here who works on this issue. And it's to the Commission, it's to the Member States. And that's to stick together in the face of what President Trump is now suggesting, that he will say, if you tax the multinationals too much, watch out what I'm going to do to you. And the only way to stand up to bullies is to stick together. And that means that we need to finally agree that we have a Europe-wide effective corporate tax rate of at least 25%. We should be able to get to that. We also need exactly as the conversation has gone, which is that the burden on working people is just too much. It's in every single crisis, the first people asked to give most and to make the sacrifices were working people. And that's on top of the constant ask in relation to taxes. So shifting taxes off human labour and onto other capital taxes in particular is the right and sensible approach. Then a word of warning, because this argument has been a little bit co-opted by employers who say, we shouldn't pay any social security contributions because that's an unfair tax on labour. And nothing could be farther from the truth. Social security contributions are absolutely essential to make sure that in old age, or when you're ill, or when you're pregnant, when you're bringing up children, all of those social security systems are the foundation of European competitiveness. So we cannot allow individual employers seeking to make a quick win for themselves to undermine a fundamental of our European competitiveness, which is our European social security system. So that's the three things. Thank you. Thank you for the clear report. Secondly, to work together, to stick together at European level, not to give in to the individual attacks. And then thirdly, not to buy into the argument, which is that social security can be considered as an unfair tax burden. The final thing I want to say, and I was thinking about will I say this or not, but I'm going to say it. A lot of us were in the room a while ago when we were discussing the fiscal rules. And everything we warned about, those fiscal rules being adopted, came true. I'm not happy to say that. I'm not gloating. I wish we had been wrong. I wish the trade union economists had been wrong and that the fiscal rules would not have introduced austerity. It's not what's happened. They have introduced austerity. So now we need to work all the more so together to make sure that the taxes are part of the solution in relation to the fiscal governance rules and not just cuts. It can't just be that we now pretend that there wasn't a problem. There was a problem in adopting those rules. It's now playing out in member states, whether it's in relation to the obsession with pension ages or whether it's in relation to cuts on public services or much needed wages of public servants. We need to make sure that increases in taxes, not on working people, but on wealth, are part of that discussion. And everybody who voted in favour of those fiscal rules, there's now an obligation for a real tax solution also to be part of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Quentin, as it was mentioned a couple of times today, the Brazilian presidency of the G20 initiated a debate. And in that context, Gabriel Zuckman, who's the director of the EU Tax Observatory, actually came up with a proposal, which you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not exactly a new tax on the wealthy, but would be would mimic Pillar 2 and would be a minimum taxation of the wealthiest. So I was wondering, could you tell us what are the next steps at the G20 and whether you think the EU should wait for a global agreement as it did with Pillar 2 or if it should move on its own?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to FEPS and Sorsa Calavi Foundation for the invitation and a very important report. As Elodie mentioned, we were lucky enough to be in the room in the G20 conversation, and I think that what happened last year in Brazil was instrumental. This is the first year in 25 years of negotiation at the G20 that we have a conversation on the taxation of the super rich. We had many issues being tackled at the G20, first time ever we talk about the taxation of the super rich. And over the 8 to 9 months where we were in the room addressing finance ministers, being commissioned reports to address some of the questions that were raised by countries, we were able to see how that conversation was creating political space. And Aurore, you mentioned that this is much easier today to talk about the taxation of the super rich than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, and to normalize this issue. We're dealing with an issue that is, in a very contradictory way, super popular across countries. There's a huge majority in every country you poll, huge majority in support for the taxation of the super rich, including sometimes cross-party lines. You ask a majority of Republican voters in the US, they do support increasing taxes on the super, super rich. And yet, at the same time, we're dealing with issues that fail to translate into actual political changes because they are seen either as too radical or too utopian. So I cannot stress enough the importance of that conversation starting at the G20. Now, I think that we are all aware of the much more difficult political landscape. What are the next steps in that context? I think that the G20 was very useful to build the political momentum. And this is what, throughout the history of international tax cooperation, this is what G20 did. This is not where the negotiations happen for a very good reason. This is not up to the 20 richest countries in the world to decide the rules that would govern global tax governance. We need a much more inclusive conversation. There's a conversation starting at the UN, and Chiara was mentioning this before. They are negotiating as we speak this afternoon on electing the question of taxation of the super rich as one of their priority. There's a conversation going on at the OECD, and they will discuss in April whether or not to make it a priority of their plan of work. So this is the global. Now, your second question on what should the EU do? I think that the opposition between global, European, and national is rather pointless, in the sense that this is not either the global or the regional or the national. We need to put our energy in every spaces we have, particularly in this very difficult context. And if you look again at the history of international tax cooperation, it's never either global or local or national. Global agreement on information exchange started because one country, the US, went on its own and then was mimicked by a global agreement. Minimum tax on corporations started because a number of countries, including European countries, European member states, decided on their own to design digital service taxes. And that pushed a number of countries back to the stage of international cooperation. So it's never global or local. It's about feeding both processes. National processes feed into the global processes. They give the space to they strengthen the international processes. And of course, international processes give space at national level. I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago and heard the finance minister from a Latin American country telling us, this is the first time I can address this issue in my national parliament because this is being discussed at the global level. So we need to be strong on both ends. Let me finish this by addressing the elephant in the room, President Trump and the US administration. President Trump withdrew from the OECD agreement a week ago. Yesterday, the US delegation withdrew, or at least walked out of UN international tax negotiations. It's not a surprise. And again, if you read the campaign material of the Trump administration, it should not come as a surprise for any of us. I think that Europe has 3 ways to react to that. One is to align with the Trump administration agenda and renounce to the fighting tax evasion by multinationals and the super wealthy. I don't think that this would be a very popular mandate because this will result in further spending cuts and perhaps also further tax increase on workers. Not a super popular strategy. Second strategy would be to design international tax rules, but give a pass to US multinationals and US billionaires. That would basically result in giving an unfair advantage to multinationals and American multinationals and American billionaires, and in the long run, this is not equitable. The third one is to face the Trump administration. And yes, there's a risk of retaliation. We all know, but there's a risk of retaliation as well if Denmark doesn't give up Greenland, if Panama is not part of the US in a couple of weeks, if Europe doesn't buy more American oil and gas, and every week there will be another threat. So this is also about political will, and I've heard that a lot of times from the beginning of that session. And at the end of the day, yes, it will be very difficult, but this is also the time where Europe needs to face a bold agenda, because this is not just about economic inequality, this is also about the rule of law and the vision we have of democracy as a whole.
Thank you. Turning back to Aurore Laluc, I'm wondering, so last year you campaigned for a citizen initiative on taxing the rich, and we know that some other political groups in the European Parliament are also eager to have such a tax. But I'm wondering, what are the chances and how we can actually build a majority of European forces, also with political parties that are a bit reluctant, how to convince them, how to build this majority?
Well, I think it will be difficult. The European Parliament that we have right now is not the same that we had during the previous term. I mean, we have a lot of far right, as you know, 3 political groups from far right. Some of them can be divided, but not all of them. And what's happening in the US is not helping, to be true to you. I mean, I mean, I agree with Quentin when he was saying that most of the people in every country want a taxation on the super, super rich. When you look at the American reality, for instance, people who voted for Donald Trump, they did not vote for him because they were angry, but because they like him. It was, I'm sorry, but I mean, when you have such a majority that it's not because you're angry and you are rejecting the Democrat, it's because you are endorsing the proposal coming from this man. And this is something we need to face as progressists to understand what's going on. And one of the points that people loved especially was what Trump was saying on taxation. And so we need to have this in mind. I mean, nothing is very simple right now. We have some very, contradictory situation in every country. The fact that the Trump administration is so vocal on cutting tax, it has some impact also in Europe, because, I mean, some extreme right, some far right political group, but also perhaps some member of the EPP are now saying, look, they're right. And if we are to increase taxes, then all the companies are going to fly in the US, and then there will be some unemployment, and then it will be the end of the world. So we go back to the kind of things we could hear 10 years ago or 40 years ago. We have the same, we can hear right now exactly the same thing. So it will be very hard, frankly, to build a majority. We will do our best for sure, because as you know, it's very important for us as S&D. But frankly, it's going to be tough. And if you look at, for instance, my country, France, we have a lot of billionaires, a lot. The first thing that they said, I mean, when you think of Bernard Arnault, for instance, I think that he has almost the same amount of money than the Portuguese GDP. Okay, so he has a lot. He's wealthy like hell. And it was saying, if there is some taxation, some rise of taxation in France, that I will go in the US. Frankly, this kind of taxation for him has really no impact at all. But you see how immediately they use this political call to, yes, to say, okay, then we will leave if you touch taxation. So we will fight to have some fair taxation. We would fight because we need to have also some European champion. We need, especially in the tech, for instance, because we have, you can see what's going on with X, with Facebook, etc. So we will fight for it. But frankly, it's not going to be easy. So the best that can occur is that EPP and also of the far right is divided because of what Trump is trying to do to Europe with the tariff. And if you're a real patriot, then I think you shouldn't be very happy with what Donald Trump is doing to Europe and to the member state of Europe.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Esther, what is your response to claims that higher tax on the rich will discourage entrepreneurship and lead to capital flights, but also considering that we're taxing labor now, but labor is also becoming more and more dematerialized and thus also mobile?
I'm not convinced that increasing taxes on capital will mean that all jobs leave Europe. I'm just not persuaded by that argument. Mm-hmm. I think that there'll be threats about that, but I'm just not persuaded by it. I think what's more interesting discussion, which is how do we have an industrial policy in Europe for both manufacturing and services in the public sector that gives us a competitive advantage, and that competitive advantage is what's attractive to entrepreneurs. And that's the type of entrepreneurship, that's the type of European workplace, the type of industrial policy that Europe wants to invest in, encourage and build. We don't necessarily want the tech bros. So for us, the essential part, the other missing piece of the economic discussion is about having an investment tool. And that investment tool needs to do what the Shore Initiative during the time of COVID, which is to manage a disruptive change by having to make sure that the company can succeed, but also that the workers can succeed. But also we saw in the Inflation Reduction Act in America, Biden did the exact same. So he introduced a program that says there's investment to help you, but the price of that, there's a string attached, and the string attached is that you have to have collective bargaining and you have to support the workers so that they can similarly succeed. And I think Europe needs to have the courage to have its own discussion on its own terms. Not to only have a discussion about how do we respond to Trump, because then he's setting the agenda. We do need to respond to Trump, so I'm not saying that. We can't ignore what's happening. but we shouldn't only be having that discussion. And in relation to taxes, we need to have a broader societal vision about what's the fair share, what's the distributed justice either in wages or in taxes, and then just build a vision around that we can encourage working people to believe in, rather than the one that's currently promoted and given to them by the far right, which is you owe nothing to your neighbour, nothing to anybody else. You pay the smallest amount of taxes, you keep it for yourself, or you take care of yourself, and the winner takes everything else. And I just don't, I'm genuinely not convinced, not only because of my obvious political beliefs, but I just think Europe can't win that. It's like even from a CEO perspective, Europe can't win that. What we can win is on developing, believing in, supporting our social Europe, and taking that as the foundation cornerstone forward, not the winner takes all stuff. That's but I do understand, like, we're up against it. And so that's why it's very important that we build alliances, that we work together, but I don't think that we only have the discussion in response to Trump. We need to have our own vision of competitiveness on quality jobs, investment, working together.
Thank you. Quentin, building on everything that was said, how realistic is the path towards a deal at the G20 with or without the US? And if I may add, and going a bit off script, but as a subset of this question, let's speculate a bit and say we will not have a global deal. How can we design anti-tax avoidance measure within the tax to make sure that we actually don't end up losing? Thank you.
A very important question indeed, and I shamelessly on my first statement basically dropped the ball to elected representatives, saying, well, it's a matter of political will, and it is certainly a matter of political will, but the technical input is super important. And part of the conversation we had at the G20 was also to respond to a lot of technical questionings. What is the best way to address wealth concentration? And we indeed supported that initiative of a minimum tax, which in a way integrates a lot of what the report calls for, because what we're saying is what is already paid by the super rich is integrated into a minimum amount that they should pay. That minimum amount is expressed as a fraction of wealth, because this is the least manipulable, least vulnerable to tax evasion, but we're already taking into account what you already pay. So if you already pay a lot of taxes, nothing changes for you. We are actually targeting those that do not pay taxes. Now, very similarly to what is in the report, there's a very much needed conversation on anti-avoidance mechanism. What do we do if the wealth is shifted offshore? What do we do if the super rich change tax residency? And in fact, those are the two most frequent questions when we deal with the taxation of the super rich. And the report that was commissioned by the G20 presidency to us answered this in a way saying, we need to build on the success of past international tax cooperation deals. It's not the same world that we had 10 years ago. Now we have much more information exchange, which means that if wealth is shifted offshore, our tax administration knows it. We had preliminary analysis at the EU Tax Observatory showing that now with the introduction of the automatic exchange of bank information, tax administration are able to track 2/3 of the offshore wealth that was invisible to their eyes before. And it's just the first year of implementation. There's much more we can do, but it's much easier now for tax administration to track offshore wealth. So we have the technical tools. Same things for tax residency rights. How can we deal with the threat of moving tax residency without hampering freedom of movement? Because of course, it's not about preventing people from moving from one country to another. The report very helpfully talks about exit taxation, and we explored in our own commission report to the G20 a number of versions of exit taxation forms, including what we called anti-tax exile taxation, which basically would set up a tax that say you were a long-term resident in one of the member state country in Europe and you decide to move elsewhere for tax purposes. You can go, freedom of movement, of course, but you keep paying the taxes that you would have owed if you would have stayed in the member state. We can do that because now we have access to automatic exchange of bank information, so we build on the progress of past international tax cooperation. Of course, all of this requires a lot of political will, and I do not want to understate the difficulty of this. Let me be very clear. If it was easy, it will be done already. Yeah. We're dealing with a difficult issue, but we're dealing with an issue of tremendous importance for the future of the Union and for the future of the rule of law as we know it.
My mic was still on, sorry. I want to see if there are any questions from the audience as well. I see one, Anne Damiani from Agence Europe.
Hello. Well, Elodie introduced me, so no need for me to do it. Thank you for the conference. You mentioned the fact that, well, some billionaires want to be taxed, but others are supporting Trump and blackmailing our society to leave. Is there any leverage that, I don't know, that politics can put in place to avoid, to make them stay, whatever, or to, I don't know, well, if you leave, you don't get your money anymore, or you don't get to take the work, I don't know, your industry cannot move and you cannot delocalize. Is there any other way that we can have to make them stay and then tax them however we want? Thank you.
Thank you. I suggest we take all the questions at the same time since we have limited time. I think there were one, okay, here and this one.
One other aspect of enabling more sort of wealth taxation is transparency, and I wanted to link this to a discussion that has been going on in my home country, Sweden, where there was a discussion on introducing a wealth and asset register, which the current right-wing government abolished. So I wanted to just check if there was any sort of discussion on EU level to introduce such a register.
Thank you. Can I ask you just to state your name and who you're working for? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have a question, just a brief comment, if you allow me. My name is Branislav Ondruš. I am newly elected member, the European Parliament member of EMPL and INTA. And I've been serving for 9 years as a Slovak State Secretary for Labor and Social Affairs. I came to politics from trade unions, so that's my background. However, why I'm mentioning it is not just to introduce myself, but I want to say that I try. I'm looking at political discussions from this executive point of view, and since I represent in Slovakia for 9 years, also as a member of EPSCO Council, and I worked with Laszlo when he served as a commissioner, and then with Nicola Schmidt. So when I'm describing it because I want to say two points, or stress 2 points. Laszlo and then also Nicola paid a big attention in order to organize common meeting of EPSCO and ECOFIN councils. And I must say that once it already happened, and it was last March, if I remember correctly, I must say that it was a big challenge to coordinate positions of social democratic finance and labor ministers. So I want to say that what would be also very interesting if you could prepare some analysis of social democratic parties' tax policies, especially in the time when they were or they are ruling parties, because sometimes it is a big problem inside of social democratic family in Europe to find a common positions regarding the taxation of capital, and it's obvious that me as a labor state secretary was always much more, let's say, progressive. However, I think that it would be really fine if FEPS could organize something like this presentation also to PS member states. I mean, those who are responsible for finance issues. If they are opposition parties, so somebody from parliament, if they are ruling party, so somebody from the government. Because if it is true that we need some common action at European level, it is not enough to convince us, members of European Parliament, but we need support also at the level of member states. And therefore, we need to present that taxation of capital, wealth, and capital taxation is common, very clear, common priority of social democrats across the Europe. And second point, notice is regarding to the use of such of the collected money by any taxation. Last September, it was very interesting. Oxfam with other organizations presented us in the European Parliament their, let's say, analyses on actions financed by Global Gateway strategy project tool. And it was really a disaster to listen to them about huge frauds of money which were invested through Global Gateway in benefit of global multinationals. So this is another issue. Speaking about taxation, offensive taxation, progressive taxation, we need also to make an order in expenses at the European level as well. So to be sure that once we will collect more taxes, these taxes will serve ordinary people, will serve workers, and not multinationals. So that's two challenges, let's say, which we politicians
can I please ask you
have
to
respond.
conclude because we're running out of time.
Okay, sorry. However, I want to thank you because for me it is very interesting and very useful. Thanks.
Can I ask the previous speaker to just introduce himself because we didn't hear?
So my name is Marvin. I'm currently a trainee for S&D Group in Envy, but I will in less than a week move to PES to start working with ECOFIN issues.
Okay, we'll be in touch later then. I will start with Aurore Laluc. We really have a little time, so I know it's a lot to ask, but if you can keep it short.
So very briefly, just wanted to say first that I fully agree with Esther Lynch. We need to have our own agenda and our own strategy and to be a little bit more aggressive. I mean, this is the story of the political life, and if you are afraid of this kind of things, then you do something else, basically. I agree, and by the way, it was also the aim of the Draghi report. And when I read what the European Commission proposed from the Draghi report, I can read simplification and securitization, but nothing right now on the European industrial policy and the way to fund it. That was my first point. Second point, to answer to Elodie, we need to implement some exit tax. First, we need to win the election. That's the first point. If you want fair taxation, then you need S&D people. That's the first point. Second, we need to implement, for instance, but there is so many technical possibility. We can implement an exit tax, and when we have an exit tax, we can raise it. I mean, for people who have ever lived in the US, I mean, if you have ever been for a long period of time, even short period of time in the US, then you need to pay your taxes for a long time, even if you go back to Europe. So why we don't do exactly the same? I think we should. So it could be an answer. And then I give the floor to my colleagues. Regarding the last point, yes, it's always difficult to find a common ground on taxation, because I mean, it's a political issue, but it is also linked to each history of each member state, of your social model, or things that are very, very touchy. And so most of the time, yes, it's difficult to find, I would say, a common ground, but also sometimes from very good reason. I must admit, but it will depend also what are your national interests and what is your relation to the European Union. Are you a federalist or not? I think in a time of a crisis, in a time when we need to be united, I'm sorry to say it this way, against Russia, against China, and now against America. It was our democracy in last resort, and we were kind of losing it, and it's a pity. I think we should be united. I think we should be pragmatic, and we need some money to be strong, to protect our people, so we need fair taxation.
Yeah, I'm also going to start by completely agreeing. So for some reason, this France, what's it? France, Netherlands, United States. All of the discontent and anger about this ended up in a vote for the far right. I don't know, like half the people or a large number of them believing that rich people had more to offer than others, and that's really, I think, what we need to tackle. And the way which we can tackle that is by setting out a credible plan about how taxing capital and wealth can bring in the resources and how we will use those resources for investments, fair investments, with social conditionalities, meaning that quality jobs in every sector in every region can be a realistic aspiration, that everybody knows the path to success, and then ask people to vote in favour of that. That's what I see as a struggle. For us representing working people in trade unions, we're absolutely calling and calling and calling for a European industrial policy. We're calling and calling and calling for a fair taxation policy. We've set out a very clear warning that we do not want to remove the social security contributions. That has to go off the table, because I know that there's demands in different member states to put that on the table. That has to be off, and that we're an ally in the struggle for a fair taxation on an increased taxation on capital and wealth. That's we can be seen as an ally on that. But I do want to say this, but we won't defend the status quo. No? So that's to say that very clearly. That's not a prospect for working people, because too many working people are not succeeding in the status quo. So there has to be an alternative. Yeah.
Thank you. I started this by talking about the G20 and the importance that it had in normalizing this conversation, and I think that this is very important. The discrepancy between the data that we see in a number of countries and the vote is also in the belief that we can solve this issue. And I think that the message we brought to the G20 is that we now have the technical fixes, the technical solutions to deal with capital flights, to deal with offshoreization of wealth, and we need the political space now to advance. The part of the technical solutions is indeed working on asset registries and transparency. Just a bit of caution, I don't think this is a precondition. A tax is never just a tax. A tax comes with everything else, including reporting requirements that bring this structure of transparency and information available for tax administrations. And yes, we have everything we need technically. We need to convey that message, and we also need to make it resonate with people that perhaps have a different approach. Yes, this is also about fair competition. This is about fair competition between, having those with the broadest ability to pay taxes that pay less than the rest of us. Is it a sustainable path for the future? We don't believe so. And if we do want fair competition between everyone, between multinationals and SMEs, between employees and billionaires, yes, we need a reform of the tax system.
Thank you. Just one point, because one question was asked about an asset registry. I seem to recall that the European Parliament, in the context of the negotiation of the EU budget, actually asked the Commission to make a feasibility study of such a registry. And the study was actually published during the summer when nobody was here. I was still working, so this study has been made. But the Commission back then said they won't go any further after that study. So thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you to the organizer for asking me to moderate. And I think we will hear from Bruno Gonçalves, who's the FISC coordinator for the S&D group in the European Parliament.
So I'll try to take the least of your time. But let me tell you something just as to start. I think we have more people interested in taxation outside of the parliament rather than inside the parliament. What is also a very good note, because that means that probably the flow will come from the outside to the inward, and then we can actually start doing something. I had some notes that I wanted to comment with you, because usually when I don't do it, I start, flowing around. But with the last panel that we have had and the study, I really want to do a bit of that as well. So first, thank you for the study, and thanks to FAPS for organizing this event. And I think we are in a pivotal moment. And this is, don't get me wrong, but when taxation becomes one of the top issues for a society, we are doing something very wrong. And there are different forms of taxation, but usually taxation comes when we need to enforce equality and justice. Meaning that, as Esther just said a while ago, that when the status quo is not good or is not working for the majority. And I think we are coming to that point, where the majority of the working class people are not feeling that the social welfare is working for them, where the majority of people working a journey of 8 or more hours per day are not feeling that by the end of the month they have better conditions that they had before. So this is generating a kind of sense of frustration that comes in different forms. And this is this is also important on the time when we are speaking not only of geopolitical adversaries as enemies, but also as geopolitical allies, as competitors. I was just checking by now some of the data that we have on the United States of America. And it's very funny because one of the countries that is one of the top, it is the top GDP in the world, but it is also one of the top ranked countries when it comes to the relation between debt to GDP. The US ranks 8th. It's also the country that depends less on global commerce. If we go on the percentage of exports and imports of the US compared to their GDP, they actually are ranked 191st place out of 195. So this means that we are in a world where we are dependent on some global economies, one to be the American. But this does not mean exactly that the American economy is fully dependent on the goods that they are trading with other countries. I'm not going to the dollar or to the currency, that's another story, but at least to the goods. And coming back to some things that I wanted to share with you, the first one and the foremost, it is what do we stand for as socialists, as social democrats. I think that we stand for, as within since the creation of socialism itself, for the working class people and for rights for everyone. And when it comes to taxation, what we have noticed over the past decades is that taxation is not working the same way for everyone. And that's also because when you are a billionaire or when you are on top of a multi-billion company, you are probably, or you are definitely more, not only more eager, but it is more possible to you to escape some of the financial rules that can apply in some of the regions in the world, namely the European Union. And I think this is quite disturbing when we are living in an era, on a year or in a decade, where minimum wages are barely the same in some of our countries, but then we are looking at capital, and capital is successively increasing and increasing at the top. So there is something that we need to do. And I don't want to speak more on drag report, letters report, competitiveness compass. They are very nice and very beautiful documents. But I want to be very, very pragmatic on what we can do from the European Parliament and also from the European institutions. And that goes without saying that the veto power is something that in the European institution has been blocking a lot of the discussions. But we also need to be not naive enough not to take an advantage when the advantage is in front of our eyes. And when it comes particularly to the Saving and Investments Union that we have been tackling for the last years, I believe that we now have a political scenario that makes it a possibility. So we have seen that EPP is speaking about it. Ursula von der Leyen is saying that it is one of the top instruments that they can use to fund somehow with private investment the competitiveness compass. And we know at our side that it does not mean protecting banks, but it can mean to protect consumers and being sure that also taxation can be harmonized. There was someone mentioning today that harmonization is simplification. I don't know if this is the way we can convince the right wing in this parliament to go on the harmonization sphere, but I think it's very fair to speak of that as well. And then lastly, but not least, to speak about the role of the European Union and our role as parliamentarians in this new multilateral and global framework. We know what has been the executive order from administration Trump regarding the negotiations we have undertook last mandate within the OECD. But I think that European Union should not go away or thrive away from what we have already resoluted in the last mandate. And that means executing Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. In a global, I've seen a study this week that says that until 2030, the new income, the 60% of the new income until 2030 will be digital income. Yet, when it comes to taxing digital income in the European Union, we are far from having a solution for that. And it goes without saying that the threats from the Trump administration will keep coming. And we will never know if these are threats to keep or threats to negotiate. We have seen the delay now on the tariffs applied to Canada and to Mexico. We have just heard today that Chinese are retaliating with tariffs on American goods. And we know that it will come. The time to deal with the European Union will come. And it goes without saying that we are much more dependent on the US than the reverse. It does not mean that it will affect them less than it will affect us, but it means that we will feel the impact much sooner than they will do. And when that time comes, taxation, international agreements or international economic policy and geopolitics will come hand by hand. I don't know what will happen, for example, with the exports that are going from Canada to the US. 25% of them are oil or sub-oil products. Is this an opportunity for the European Union? It can be. Is this an opportunity for China? It can be. Can it be harmful for everyone? It will surely be. But we need to be sure that the compromises that we have done during last mandate and the strategy that we have had for the future is the strategy that we keep on. And I don't know if showing the study that you have just presented us to Trump would do anything. I surely think that probably it wouldn't, but at least it should make us reflect on something. And if we have so many people here today that are interested on taxation, if we have been tackling, and I mean, standing for fair taxation all over this period, what I think or what I expect from the mandate that we have now, these 5 years, is that we can go a bit forward in terms of action, in terms of implementation. It is true, as Aurore was saying just a few minutes ago, if 5 years ago we were speaking about taxing wealth, we would be named communists or something close to that. Now it is Trump creating a wealth fund to invest, or as he said today, he's investing on a wealth fund to buy things. If it was a socialist doing something as a national wealth fund to buy things, we would be called something different than he is. But this means that the world is really changing. It means that people are not affording and cannot afford the status quo anymore. So if on the right wing they have managed to create a narrative, the tariffs narrative, to protect the working class people because it will supposedly create new jobs for the working class people in these countries, I think we should be able to do the same thing on the other arena. Protecting, not globalization, but protecting freedom, protecting fairness, and that means also having fair rules for everyone. And whether we call it taxation or not, we need to be sure that it applies for everyone, because that has been the foundation of our democracy and surely the foundation of this European Union, even before being a political one. So thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for the support. Is it good?